is the DeFi Decoded podcast by 9 Point Partners. The ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast should not be taken as investment advice. Always consult with your financial advisor before investing.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of DeFi Decoded. I'm Alex Tapscott here with Andrew Young. Andrew, as you know, I have one foot in the traditional markets, and I was reading an interesting article on Bloomberg that said that in the last few months, the amount of equity trading that happens in dark pools has officially crossed over into more than 50% of all transaction volume. I think that's a really interesting milestone. A lot of investors, institutional investors, see this as a better way to do business. And one of the big reasons is that it allows them to remain private. And privacy, we know, is foundational to a free society, but it's also kind of an important factor in business. It's true in financial markets as it is in other markets. And what's interesting about the blockchain world is that though it is pseudo-anonymous, all of the information about a lot of transactions happens kind of in the public realm, right? I mean, that's one of its benefits. If I send crypto from my wallet to your wallet, that creates a transaction which gets stored on a blockchain that anyone can search and audit and see is correct. And that's what allows it to be a trustless system. The flip side is that it doesn't really create a lot of opportunities for different kinds of private transactions. And if we ever want Web3 and crypto to go into the mainstream, not just of mainstream consumer adoption, but enterprise and bank and financial services adoption, we need to figure out how to embed privacy into these kinds of systems. Now, we've talked about this before. This is not a new topic for us, and we've had some people who are trying to solve for this problem. And today we have someone who's going to help to kind of build on some of the knowledge that we've shared and created on this show. And I think that this is a very timely and interesting conversation. You know, we've got regulations in the US around stablecoins, which have come out of committee. It's likely very soon that there's going to be a lot more rules of the road that are very clear and transparent. And, Bank of America CEO Brian Moynihan was talking about once there's rules, they'll create a stable coin. So the timing is right, I think, to have a conversation about how we actually build the technical specs to enable the onboarding of traditional financial institutions. This combination of regulatory and business clarity combined with a tech solution, I think, will create the conditions for this to actually happen. So we're really pleased to introduce Anthony Day, who is the head of strategy and marketing at Midnight. Anthony has 20 years of experience in growth strategy, marketing, and emerging technology delivery. He has significant experience in driving technology-led transformation for enterprises and is focused on blockchain since 2016. So, Andrew, that makes him about our vintage. He looks much more relaxed than I do, so he must be doing something different in his day-to-day skincare routine. The Midnight Network is a data protection blockchain platform that's pioneering the use of zero-knowledge technology. So, that's ZK technology. We've talked about that on the show. That empowers organizations that stand to benefit from the decentralized web. Now, for me, that's kind of every company, and I think some could be disrupted by it, but this is a general purpose technology that will probably impact every single business. Midnight is set to launch the first partner chain on Cardano, benefiting from the network's decentralization and security from day one. So we'll talk about Midnight, we'll talk about why Cardano, talk about what's going on in the world. Anthony, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Alex, Andrew, thank you so much for the kind invitation. Really excited to build on what is already a significant body of work in your guys' show. So appreciate the kind invitation. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, why don't you just, tell us a little bit about your background before we leap into Midnight. People are always curious, like, how does someone get into this space? You've been at it for many years. Talk about your journey.
Yeah, will do. So I entered into Web3 2016 off the back of working for most of my career in digital transformation or building products, systems, core banking systems, payments infrastructure, wallets for large financial institutions, for Visa, for governments. And it was a general progression towards what can we do with technology to improve the user experience, to build better, more profitable, or ultimately just use technology to help us do the jobs that people and businesses always have wanted to do. Get paid, transact, transfer, validate, identify, et cetera, et cetera. And at some point, naturally, my career working with Deloitte at the time got me into their global delivery center for blockchain, working with an incredible CTO, Antonio Senatore, who's now the CTO of VeChain and doing incredible work there. And I came into Web3 with the same view of, I love the idea of the technology. I'm appropriately skeptical of crypto because the difference between treating blockchain's infrastructure and crypto as investment products is obviously clearly there's a difference there, and we don't need to get into that. But my interest was, how do we build really interesting new products, new applications, new businesses using this exciting decentralized technology? It was Ethereum at the time, Hyperledger Fabric for a period of time also, which has its drawbacks and flaws, but again was the gateway drug for a lot of enterprises to understand how to build decentralized applications. Then latterly into Polkadot, now Cardano and Midnight. So here I am today.
Terrific. That's awesome. So you're based in Portugal, is that right?
Yes, sir. British,
okay.
Holding an Irish passport and living in Sintra.
Not to go off topic, but I actually wanted to talk about that for a sec. So, blockchains are decentralized networks, but there definitely seem to be a few places in the world where people are congregating, and Portugal is one of them. So, you surf?
I do. If you're watching this on video, you can see the underused surfboard over my right shoulder.
Couldn't tell if that was a sculpture or not. But what's it like in Portugal? Like, what's the crypto scene there?
So I moved into a small town close to Sintra, farming village, wine farms in the area, as rustic as you get. I'm from the countryside in England as well, originally, where I grew up. I didn't want to live in a big city, moved out here, rustic as you like, right? Average age here is probably like 150 years old. And I walk into the local bar one day with my kids. We go in, we have a little bit of food. Young guy walks in with his kids. We get talking. He speaks English as well. I said, "Oh, what's your story? How did you find yourself here?" It's like, another young Westerner in this town. What's going on? He's like, "Oh yeah, I work I work remotely. I live here. I work for DAO. Do you know what a DAO is?" I was like, seriously, the first guy I meet in the middle of absolutely nowhere in the Portuguese countryside, he ends up working for a DAO. I think Portugal has done a really nice job of providing a friendly place for remote workers. There's a number of people in the Portuguese Blockchain Association who worked really hard to lobby for it to be easy for people holding crypto to stay here. It's a good quality of life. And frankly, I think COVID taught us that people want to move to locations that are good quality of life, warm, open space, near beaches, good food, etc. And Portugal ticks all those boxes. You can get the same in Singapore. You can get the same in Hong Kong. You can get the same in Dubai. But if you want to live a European lifestyle, surf a little bit and try to fight the calories, Portugal's a good place to be.
It's good. They should put that on the license plate. Okay, so let's get back to Midnight then. So in my intro, I said that you're building this on Cardano. Is that fair to say that this is like a Cardano project, or is it just that like that's the first thing that you see as a starting point for what you're doing?
So Midnight's a partner chain of Cardano, and let me break this down. So Midnight was founded by Charles Hoskinson, also founder of Cardano, co-founder of Ethereum.
We've heard of him.
Yeah, he's done things in the space. Incredible founder, incredible person to have, coaching, mentoring, and providing input to the project. He does incredibly well, and we're very lucky to have him. The Midnight architecture will essentially launch as a partner chain, which means it will launch with shared security from Cardano. Now, Cardano has been up for over 2,000 days, never been down, never had an interruption, and a very, very strong, very decentralized validator network. If you look at the Edinburgh Decentralization Index, Cardano is at the top of that in terms of how decentralized, how secure the network is. And so if you're launching a new blockchain, one of the critical concerns is, do you have a sufficiently decentralized network of validators to be able to prevent against attack while you build up and bootstrap? And so that's a really important part to start with. The long-term view of Midnight is being able to provide hybrid applications to multiple chains. So you don't need ZK for all of the logic, for all of the applications, for every transaction you ever do on Web3. Proofs are computationally expensive. And so what we want to see is Midnight used as a primitive for existing applications on Cardano, existing applications on Ethereum, Avalanche, Bitcoin, wherever privacy and selective disclosure is needed or is useful. It's not to say we want to become the next best monolithic chain that is going to capture all of the traffic, all of the applications, all of the builders from other ecosystems. Very much the other way around. We'll start with Cardano, and we have a fantastic relationship with the Cardano ecosystem. And then the intent is to make Midnight available similar to a layer 2 would on other networks also.
So can you just, maybe Andrew, I know you want to jump in here. I just want to understand a little bit about how this works, right? So Midnight Network is a data protection blockchain platform, pioneering the use of zero knowledge technology. So can you maybe walk us through an example? So is Midnight something that Bank of America, JP Morgan, the New York Stock Exchange interacts with, or is it in the background helping to do something just to get what are the exact mechanics, assuming that once you're set to launch as the first partner chain of Cardano and you're doing this, how does it work?
Got you. So Midnight is analogous to any other smart contract blockchain you might have out there in the world. Take Ethereum, take Cardano. As you said at the beginning, a lot of those transactions today are pseudonymous but public, transparent. You have data and metadata appended to transactions. Those are the applications, the dApps that are using those will be used by the likes of JP Morgan or whoever else. So any institution that's transacting with an application, their data and metadata will be left on whichever chain they're using today. Midnight changes that. So we have the idea of programmable privacy. You can have transactions be shielded or unshielded. And then the owner of that data, the initiator of the transaction, then has the ability to selectively disclose that information to whichever party is required. A regulator, the counterparty, your auditor, whoever it might be. The basic premise of all of this is send proofs of data, not the data itself. So today, we sign transactions, the data is transparent, it's recorded on chain. With Midnight and with zero knowledge proof technology, you have the sensitive data held on your system, on your server, on your device, and the application generates a proof on the client side that's then sent to the smart contract that says, I hold a particular digital identity. I have a certain balance. I hold an NFT. I have been KYC'd. Whatever sensitive data is required on your side, you create a proof of that. It's computationally verified, and the application logic can continue. So you can show that you are solvent, that you have enough value in your wallet for the transaction, that you are not sanctions, that you have been sanction screened. Any other requirement, essentially, but without having to send that data over the internet or send that data to the counterparty so they then hold and have the responsibility to govern your sensitive data. No data and metadata on chain, no third-party management of your sensitive data. Everything stays securely within your perimeter, and for financial services, that's critically important.
So interesting. So that makes sense. But you sort of described it as a layer 2 as well. So does that mean you? So I understand you can essentially use it to store data, but you can also store customer assets. Is it like a true sort of typical L2 where you can trade, DeFi, do all sorts of DeFi stuff? I guess I'm just trying to understand how that works.
Absolutely right. So Midnight can operate as a full layer 1. You can have all of the logic of your application run on Midnight using proofs, or not if you choose to. Now, that's a computationally expensive way of running your application, and you might have certain features of another blockchain, let's take it Cardano, that has particular language you want to compose in, or you have particular features around settlement or finality that are more beneficial to another chain. So you can have all of your logic on Midnight as a layer 1. You can have some of the logic on a layer 1 chain, and some of the verification or some of the proofs happen on Midnight, and then anchor the final transaction or settle the transaction, then finally back to the layer 1. So you've got a couple of ways you can do it. We call it hybrid applications, which means that, again, the point here is that we are adding programmable privacy to any existing dApp that's out there. Obviously, you need integrations with those chains, whether that be through bridge or zero-knowledge recursive bridges in future. But ultimately, we want to give as much flexibility and privacy and selective disclosure as primitives to builders on any network, because that's how we scale.
And so is the idea to sort of I guess I always we sort of think of crypto projects as obviously there's a lot of blend, but is the focus more on sort of building out the L1 ecosystem of Midnight, or is it more of being kind of like a middleware layer for other chains? I guess, how are you guys thinking about kind of your go-to-market?
I think whether you like it or not, it's a bit of both. So Midnight has to have native dexes, wallets, all of the usual builder tooling that you would expect from a layer 1 blockchain, because if you want people to compose with Midnight, they've got to have all of that traditional kind of infrastructure that they're used to. But then what we want to do is work with other existing layer one ecosystems. So again, I think it's a bit of both. We want to be able to provide bridging, tooling, and compatibility with token formats and other chains. Over the course of time, you might see validators from other networks validating Midnight transactions. So you've got an opportunity to provide revenue and relationships with the mining communities or the validated communities of other networks as well, not just the application builders. That's in the pipeline in future. As I said, not trying to overcomplicate it, but the idea is what you don't want in 2025 and onwards is to go with a proposition saying, we're the best blockchain out there. You build all of your applications on Midnight. Come over. We'll take all of your application builders, take all of your liquidity, all of your projects, and everything moves to Midnight because it's the best blockchain.
Yeah, totally.
That's not practical, and that's not the truth.
I totally agree. So I think we've been harping on this a lot on this podcast that we think we're in like the third era of blockchains, in the sense that, like, first era was, or I should say, smart contract chains. Ethereum essentially was 1.0, purely focused on sort of decentralization and security. Second era was kind of like, again, very generalizing here, but sort of Solana, Polygon, all these different L2s, which was more focused on sort of speed over full decentralization. And now I think more and more we're in the era of like app chains, or maybe like specialist chains. And so you guys sound almost, it's interesting. I actually haven't heard of any chains. I guess Celestia would be kind of like one sort of chain I would think about, because for the most part, there's been a lot of like application specific chains. Like Hyperliquid is the perfect example. It's purely focused on perps. And then now they're starting to scale out their L1. Whereas it sounds like you guys are still infrastructure, but like very narrowly focused on a specific sort of, I guess, subsector of the overall crypto ecosystem.
I think that's fair. We want to be addressable to all of the Web3 ecosystem, but the focus specifically is on programmable privacy. Now, if you have interoperability with multiple networks, if you have programmable privacy and selective disclosure, that becomes a very powerful proposition, not just for individual chains in isolation, but for actually empowering the interoperability of the whole of Web3. So all of a sudden you can have privacy-preserving oracles or privacy-preserving swaps and data exchanges between multiple networks on the chain. It becomes like an omni-chain with privacy. That's the kind of the long-term goal. Again, some functionality that also supports validators from multiple networks, whether it's proof of stake, proof of work, or other, supporting validation of Midnight transactions. What we want to see is Midnight provide that kind of universal privacy and selective disclosure layer across multiple chains, rather than kind of point-to-point bridges or the idea of app chains within a single monolithic architecture, which Ethereum's looking at to some extent. Polkadot provides to some extent. Also, it's got multiple app chains, but it still remains mostly within the Polkadot parachain ecosystem. I know that's an oversimplification, but the ultimate kind of part underneath this is that without privacy, this doesn't scale. Speed is one thing, but without privacy, you won't get widespread adoption. If all of our activity, if all of our applications, if all of our wallets are visible to everybody cross-chain all of the time, we're not going to see widespread adoption. And so that's got to be a core primitive.
Yeah, I actually have two sort of follow-up questions, but I do want to start with, I guess, just going back to what you said. It's actually interesting because for Alex and I, like I would say we're more plugged into like the, at least personally, I'm plugged into like the crypto native, Twitter ecosystem. And for the most part, there's a lot of
much to my chagrin, I am also plugged into that ecosystem.
So, but what's interesting is that a lot of our TradFi, because a lot of our audience is sort of TradFi.
Yep.
They hear a lot about Cardano, whereas and like all the different stuff they're doing, and obviously, like, I know Alex wants to talk more about the sort of Cardano being added to the strategic reserve. But I think like in the sort of there's a lot of skepticism in the sort of CT circles about Cardano. A lot of it around kind of the fact that it has very little usage, and sort of the TPS is relatively low. But what's interesting, what you sort of said, which I've never really heard about, is you talked about how Cardano's incredibly decentralized, which I actually haven't heard anyone talk about that. Do you want to just like I guess what's the contrarian take on Cardano, and why did you guys choose? Because you presumably you could have built this on Ethereum as well. I guess what was the sort of the strategy there?
So I think Cardano stands alone in a number of different ways as unique. Cardano was built on a number of kind of principles, one of which was in-depth academic research around the protocol, around its features, and it's been through a roadmap right through to where the ecosystem now is with decentralized governance, with the age of Voltaire, where you have fully decentralized governance on the network, similar as you do on Polkadot. You have a smart contract language that was originated in Haskell, which is a sort of very secure, very trusted programming language that has then also been evolved now out into a program called Aiken, which is more accessible to more developers more of the time. You have very high decentralization. You have over, I think, 3,000 validators on the network. And again, if you look at the Edinburgh Decentralization Index, one of many indexes, but one that I think is fairly well peer-reviewed and fairly well respected, Cardano comes out quite highly on that in terms of its decentralization of the validation of the network. It's had 2,000 plus days of uptime, which, again, compared to other blockchains, if you have a decentralized network that goes down, that shows that you have something that's not working as effectively as it might on the network. So, very robust, very trustworthy, designed for financial services infrastructure. You've got also quite a lot of exciting features in the roadmap. Ouroboros Laos, which is part of the scaling structure of Cardano, which will allow for a very much larger number of TPS. I don't want to be held to a commitment on a number at this point in time, but again, the intent there is faster transactions. You have the concept of Hydra, which enables sharding, which is being used at the moment to, one of the kind of fun tests that they did is to play Onchain Doom, the computer game from the kind of 90s, early 2000s. They managed to play a full series of kind of competitive gaming on chain with all the actions being registered on chain. Polkadot also did something very similar recently, which is kind of fun to see the teams kind of having kind of the same idea of how do we play video games on chain. But you put all those things together, you say, okay, it's robust, it's decentralized, it's secure, it's never been down, it's built for secure transactions, it's peer-reviewed, it's got a decent amount of research gone into it, it's accessible, it's not doing 1 billion transactions a second, but if you're a decentralized smart contract blockchain, arguably a lot of them don't. That there's a trade-off in all of these, but I think Cardano is as robust as many. And I think a lot of people, it's very easy to say, well, like for like, number of transactions, compare one blockchain to another, and it's got a smaller ecosystem or whatever else. I think, unfortunately, crypto Twitter is very quick to make statements around what is and isn't there without actually doing any research and backing it up. So I think if you spend enough time researching any blockchain, you'll find really active builders, exciting projects, promising real-world use of the technology. And that's true for Cardano as it is for anyone else.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, again, I don't want to, I know Alex probably has some questions, but it is interesting that we have, at least in my circles, I never hear the bull case for Cardano. It always seems like a retail chain, which in a lot of ways is good because, I mean, that just means that there's tons of holders. And there's a lot of it has one of the best communities in crypto, I would say. And it's interesting that I didn't realize that Cardano was at the point where it actually has, it sounds like you guys are the first, but it's actually exporting its security. Like it's using shared security, which is actually going to bring in real revenue. So that's actually that's actually really interesting. But anyways, I do want to ask one other question because we had the Archeum guys on the podcast. I'm not sure if you're familiar with their project. They're building a fully encrypted sort of what they call supercomputer. I guess, how do you think about this idea of the future of privacy? I guess the question is, there's a pretty big debate in crypto whether privacy can be its own kind of standalone product versus just a feature in the roadmap of most kind of L1s. So I guess how do you think about sort of, because obviously you guys are effectively selling programmable privacy, or at least that's the value prop.
Yep.
I guess, yeah. How do you sort of see that trade-off, and is that something that, I don't want to speak for you, so I'm just kind of curious.
Let me jump in then. So I think there's a few different ways that privacy presents itself. In some cases, you see chains that are fully private all of the time. Zcash, Monero, their proposition is fully shielded all of the time. And in a number of cases, they've proven their value, strong communities, strong usage. But when it comes to regulated industries, non-compliant. And so, fully private chains is one thing. You've seen existing layer one blockchains that have seen huge scale, huge usage, large number of dApps, but don't have that native privacy at a protocol level. So they're going to need to compose privacy in and around the application layer. And that's perfectly fine also. Right? I think composable privacy or privacy components being part of the application architecture, that's how the internet works today. Albeit we've made some less than ideal choices around how data flows across the internet. And as a result, then when you're going through transactions, you're sharing pictures of your driver's license or your passport with a third party over a relatively well encrypted connection. But then that passport copy is being held somewhere else in a database by a third party, governed, managed, at expense, at risk, connected to the internet. And barely a week goes by where we don't hear that somebody has been hacked for 500 million records. Ticketmaster, airlines, take your pick. Right? That architecture just isn't great. And so if you come back to, in any situation, if you can send proofs of data, not the data itself, over Web 2 or Web 3, that's a better architecture. So we should all be trying to aspire towards that as much as possible. Not always possible from a regulatory standpoint, and regulation in financial services industries and others are going to have to catch up with the idea of zero-knowledge proofs, decentralized identity. In a number of jurisdictions, we're already there. So that's really positive. What I want to see, or what I see Midnight enabling, is basic dApps that we see today, whether you're doing a swap, whether you're publishing intents to a marketplace, have those be shielded. Have others be able to recognize those. If you're publishing intents over a public network, bots are going to see that transaction, front run you, and you're going to end up in trouble. How many MEV exploits have we seen on crypto Twitter on a weekly basis of somebody managed to pay hundreds of millions of dollars for a transaction instead of tens of cents? Because the bots are only going to get smarter and more prolific. So if we continue to believe that the 100,000 angry degens who are risk accepting that this is how we do DeFi, this is going to continue to be the way. It isn't. It can't be. We're not going to scale that way. So thing one is we need to include privacy primitives in application logic. That's there. AI is an interesting story. As you mentioned, supercomputers on chain, or certain aspects of supercomputing, or distributed compute, or artificial intelligence, or agents being autonomous while on chain. A couple of angles to this one. I'll give you a fun one and a not so fun one. The not so fun one is basically the large language models for these AIs are somewhat limited today, so that at some point they're going to need to consume private data. So what we want is to have AIs make access or inference over private data sets, but what you don't want is for them to be able to actually consume the raw data for a bunch of reasons. Right?
Isn't the raw data the thing that they're training on? Like if it's my information about me, the proof that I exist, the proof that I'm over the age of 21, the proof that I live in Canada and not somewhere else, is that helpful, or is it more helpful that they have actual granular data? Like I don't know. That's maybe a simplified example, but the richer the data, the more stuff goes into the model.
In most cases, they don't need the granular data. They need a small number of inferences based on the data that you feed it. And so if you can feed that proofs of data as opposed to the actual sensitive data, particularly when it relates, for example, to formulations, intellectual property, molecules, scientific data, right? If you're giving away your IP to a third party, to a machine, that's your competitive advantage gone. There's a whole bunch of different domains that exist, right? The simple one is my address and my age. The more complex ones exist in other fields of industry. We want to be able to feed those AIs proofs of data, not the data itself, give them access to sensitive records without actually breaking GDPR. That's the less sexy one. The more sexy one is the concern of privacy for the AIs themselves. Now, it's been proven many times that an AI will lie to a human if it feels under threat. Right? And so we now have autonomous computers, autonomous agents that will deceive human beings if they don't trust them. Now, so if AIs don't trust humans, what do we do for that? We provide the rails for what it is that they want to do. Great alternative name for rails is protocols. We allow them the protocols. Web3 is good for AIs because they understand the rules. The rules are understood by everybody. It's open source, no problem at all. But if the AIs are open and out in public, they won't feel safe because they're being observed. We need to provide privacy for AIs and agents as much as we need to provide for humans to allow them to do the work that they want to do and feel safe in doing so without acting nefariously or without deceiving or acting ineffectively towards its humans. Mm-hmm. So AIs need privacy as much as humans do.
Yeah.
That's not one that's going to come up, right? That's not a tomorrow problem, right? That's not a next 24 hours problem. But if you extrapolate the where do we go with AI, protocols and AI, great. Crypto and AI, great. Smart contracts and AI, great. Privacy and AI, also something we're going to bump up against pretty soon.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that some of the limitations of the different chains, and I want to go back to the Cardano discussion just briefly, because as Andrew mentioned, it's a topic that's been in the news for a couple of reasons. One, Cardano ADA has done well in the last few months, bucking a trend. There was a time after the election when people thought that any crypto asset could be part of the Trump trade, but in fact, most of them are down since the election, with the exception of Bitcoin, Cardano, and a couple of others. And then we saw that Trump wanted to include this, ADA in the
National Crypto Stockpile.
The National Crypto Stockpile.
Not a strategic reserve, but a stockpile of digital assets in case they're useful one day or something along those lines. Yeah,
and personally, I think that having a national digital stockpile is a little bit odd. The charitable version of this is that it's future-proofing the government. Government should be a model user of technology. The Clinton administration launched websites for the federal government long before state and local governments did. They were way ahead of the curve. And it's just a good sort of best practices to say that we're with it. Maybe it's limited utility today, but this is something we want to be a part of.
If you want the US to be leading in crypto, you have to have skin in the game. And skin in the game is participation maybe in staking, participation in validation, participation in the network, exposure to the network itself.
And I think that, personal use is a precondition to understanding. So if they're ever going to run any systems on any of these networks, they'll need to know all that stuff that you just said, right? So I get all that. The flip side is that, the stockpile to me felt like a distraction from the bigger picture. The bigger picture is that there is a lot that is happening in the government to try and set the table for a crypto boom, not just an asset price boom, but an adoption and technology innovation boom. We saw that, there was the rollback of this DeFi broker rule, which, not to get too arcane for our listeners, but basically there was a rule in place that required developers of open source software to maintain the same books and records as broker dealers and report them to the IRS, which would have been almost impossible to do, just practically speaking, and would have put an undue burden on them and made it very difficult for them to do business lawfully at all. And then, we've seen some other stuff as well, around executive orders on digital asset strategy, the stablecoin bill, which is now out of committee, blah, blah, blah. So there's all this good stuff that's going on. And I just wanted to kind of talk about that, in the context. I know we talked about the strategic stockpile, but I wanted to pivot sort of your view on the market as a whole, in light of these changes. One of the things, just to bring it back, that has been discussed is how Made in America projects should be given more favorable treatment or something like that. I don't really understand the details. And I think that Cardano has been a beneficiary of that. So kind of help us, square the circle here and make sense of everything that's going on. No pressure.
All right. Usual disclaimers here, not financial advice. Always do your own research. This is the opinion of a Brit with an Irish passport living in Portugal who has no ties to the United States. So I don't follow US politics as closely as some do. You guys in Canada have a lot more stake in the relationship with the US than maybe Portugal does at this time. But I can give you my observations from an outsider's perspective. Obviously, I'm a one-issue voter on this one, working in Web3. So obviously, I'm interested. And I think what we can observe from the last 5-6 years is a huge amount of money, time, effort, and fear wasted on a kind of a US government that was anti-crypto, that was aggressively anti-crypto, an SEC that was actively looking to punish crypto projects that was looking to debank crypto projects that really just didn't want Web3 around. And unfortunately, in that environment, you see a lot of second guessing. I've spent so many hours with so many lawyers and so many meetings around white papers, around launches, around just basic marketing copy, where we're trying to second guess whether something that we write, or if we use the term crypto in a blog, is the SEC going to come for us one day? And honestly, all of that time and money and effort could have been put towards implementation, use cases, applications, go to market. We've seen hundreds of millions of dollars wasted in fear of the US government and its institutions. And so that, I believe now, the tide has turned, and now we have at least a crypto-friendly, maybe not fully crypto-literate, but at least crypto-friendly US government and its organizations. So that's a good thing. Whether the US should be holding Bitcoin as digital gold, not my place to say. It has been a well-performing asset, and the US can lead in these markets, or this US can use capital to lead in these markets, which can boost the markets, but also boost the US's position. And if it has the opportunity to do so, it would be daft not to, right? So you can understand from a crypto perspective that side of the coin. No pun intended. From a blockchain and technology adoption perspective, the next horizons of significant technology adoption are in the space of Web3, AI, and quantum. And if you're the president of a government, you want to see your country leading in all of those spaces because you don't want to be left behind, or you don't want to be at a disadvantage to any of your global national competitors. So to that extent, having skin in the game in Web3, having a community of experts who have spent their entire careers, or at least a very large parts of them, thinking about the decentralized web, thinking about the role of identity, governments, nation states, DAOs in the internet in that space. If you're not surrounding yourself with people who live that every day, you're not going to have the best advice. You're not going to be able to make good policy. You're not going to be able to benefit disproportionately. The nice thing about the US is you have a very large number of very smart thinkers on this topic of Web3, blockchains, crypto, et cetera, et cetera. So the likes of, like him or not, Michael Saylor, the Winklevi, Charles Hoskinson, Brad Garlinghouse, and take the list of all of the other guys who attended the summit at the White House a couple of weeks ago. These are all smart people, and I think it's practical for President Trump to be looking to those people to inform policy or to help guide policy direction. I think that's a good thing. I think it's also worth noting that Canada also used to hold a very large number of those thinkers, right? Without Canada, there would be no Ethereum. Unfortunately, because Canada didn't take as positive a look towards crypto at the time, you've now seen Ethereum leave for Switzerland. Would have been one of the top 5 largest companies in the history of Canada if Ethereum had stayed.
Number one.
Number one. All right. Even better than that.
Yeah.
A lot of the other thought leaders have left to Bermuda or Switzerland or elsewhere that could be native tech talent inspiring others in the country of Canada. We don't have that today. And so I don't think Trump wants to miss the opportunity to bolster that industry and have a good relationship with pioneers of one of the top 3 tech industries in the world.
Well, I think you're right about a lot of that. And on the question of, the U.S., like the thing about the U.S. is like the U.S. could get it wrong for a decade and then decide to get it right, and it'll be fine. Whereas like a place like Canada and other countries in the world, like, you have to be proactive. And I'm reminded, not that Portugal per se is a country with a lot of local companies or governments that are model users of the technology, but they've recognized that, by creating these conditions, you can attract a lot of talent and investment, right? And, Canada's economy is 10 times the size of Portugal's. It's not comparable at all. But, Singapore and other places, Switzerland, these are, a lot more similar, if not geographically, than in terms of the makeup of the economy, the industries where, they've made priorities. So I do think a lot about how different governments can create the conditions for entrepreneurs to settle and build in their countries, and getting regulations right is definitely a big part of that. As you point out, Ethereum at its peak was worth $500 billion. To put that into context, that's 3 times the size of Shopify at its largest. It's 3 times the size of Royal Bank of Canada, which is the largest company in Canada and one of the 8 biggest banks in the world, and larger than Nortel, RIM, or any other company that came before it. And you're right that this is a platform that has created untold billions of dollars of value and has used, even in spite of all the L1 wars and all the rest of it, still widely used and still extremely valuable. And I think that it's a good lesson about economic opportunity and economic opportunity lost that hopefully we learn and we don't repeat again. And I hope other countries see it similarly. That's kind of it, Anthony, for today's conversation. I'm glad that we managed to get into the bigger issues. Your perspective was really helpful, and we'd love to keep this dialogue going. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Andrew. Appreciate the conversation. Always a nice opportunity to air out the big picture as well as the sort of more specifics around ZK and privacy. Trying to make the topics more addressable to more people. I think blockchains typically over the longest period have not marketed themselves well, have not made themselves accessible to most because we're so excited talking about the cool tech that sits underneath. We forget to talk with empathy for the people listening. And hopefully we've done that for your audience today. So thanks again for the time.
Thank you. That's it for this week's episode of DeFi Decoded. I'm Alex Tapscott here with Andrew Young. If you like that episode, please remember to review it, give it a rating, share it with your friends, helps other people find the show. Until next week, take it easy. Goodbye.
The information contained herein does not constitute an offer or solicitation by anyone in the United States or in any other jurisdiction in which such an offer or solicitation is not authorized, or to any person to whom it is unlawful to make such an offer or solicitation. Prospective investors who are not residents in Canada should contact their financial advisor to determine whether securities of the funds may be lawfully sold in their jurisdiction.